Welcome to one of the most haunting disappearances recorded in the annals of the Deep South. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're listening from and what time of day or night this story reaches you. Some say the hour you hear it can change how it ends. It began with a small notice in the Riverside Herald on April 14, 1847. Tucked between advertisements for sugar presses and patent tonics, it read simply, "Missing, Mrs. Margaret Caldwell, wife of plantation owner Thomas Caldwell. Last seen on the evening of April 10th. A reward is offered for information leading to her safe return." What seemed at first like a routine disappearance would soon unravel into one of Louisiana's most unsettling mysteries, one that official records later tried to erase, though its echo still drifts through the cypress swamps of Riverside Parish. The Caldwell plantation stood grand and severe along a curve of the Mississippi River, a two-story white-columned mansion, 12 Corinthian pillars guarding its front veranda. From a distance, it embodied everything the antebellum South prided itself on: wealth, discipline, and control. According to parish records, Thomas Caldwell inherited the property in 1839 upon his father's death. Bank ledgers from New Orleans show that he expanded it ruthlessly over the next few years, buying adjoining lands, doubling the sugar yield, and increasing his enslaved workforce to over 100 souls. By 1845, Margaret had arrived from Charleston, the previous year, the daughter of a shipping magnate who arranged her marriage to strengthen mercantile ties between the ports of Charleston and New Orleans. Her wedding announcement in the New Orleans Picayune described her as a woman of rare beauty and distinction, destined to grace Louisiana society with refinement and charm. But surviving letters to her cousin in Virginia, found in 1952 among family papers, paint a different picture. "The air here suffocates," she wrote only 3 months after her arrival. "The house feels like a mausoleum where I am both exhibit and prisoner." The women smile, but their eyes measure, and the men speak only of yield and obedience. Parish records show that Samuel Turner, a literate enslaved man in his late 20s, was purchased in January 1846 from the New Orleans slave market. His bill of sale listed him as a carpenter of sound body and good temperament, rare words in such documents. A handwritten note, presumed to be Thomas Caldwell's, added, "To serve in the house, manage library maintenance." For nearly a year, life at the Caldwell plantation appeared uneventful. The plantation ledgers from 1846 record increasing profits and meticulous discipline. Caldwell's name appears often in local minutes, always advocating for tighter restrictions on enslaved movement between estates. A neighbor's journal, belonging to Mrs. Elizabeth Fontaine, mentions Margaret often at social gatherings. "A quiet lady, sees everything, says little." Her smile appears practiced, her eyes restless. A Christmas 1846 entry notes that Mrs. Caldwell seemed distracted during the sermon, left before the meal. Then the rains came, long, heavy, and strange that spring. With them came cracks in the order of things. A plantation entry dated March 3rd records, "Disciplinary action. St. found in mistress's sitting room without leave." A later note from March 21st reassigns him to field labor. Yet curiously, a counter-entry just a week later returns him to house service, at Mrs. Caldwell's insistence. By April 10th, the stage was set. According to the overseer's log, Thomas Caldwell left that morning for New Orleans, expected to return by Tuesday. A storm rolled in that evening, turning the sky bruise purple and the river to molten glass. The last confirmed sighting of Margaret came from the cook, who recalled she had requested tea be brought to the library around 8 o'clock. By morning, both Mrs. Caldwell and Samuel Turner were gone. What followed was one of the most extensive searches ever conducted in Riverside Parish. Caldwell returned early from New Orleans and immediately organized search parties with bloodhounds and armed riders. The New Orleans Daily Crescent reported on April 17th. 50 men with dogs scour the swamps in search of Mrs. Caldwell, feared abducted by a runaway slave. Notices went out as far north as Natchez and as far east as Mobile. The story hardened fast into a single, official narrative. Respected planter's wife taken by slave. Read the headline of the Baton Rouge Gazette on April 21st. Caldwell was quoted saying Samuel had shown signs of instability and a dangerous fascination with Mrs. Caldwell. Due to shared reading interests, a reward of $1,000 was offered for the return of Mrs. Caldwell and the capture, dead or alive, of the Negro Samuel Turner. But from the start, contradictions bled through the story. Rachel, Margaret's maid, told parish officers that Mistress had been packing a small valise for several days, adding little things so no one would notice. Her statement was struck from the official record, but survived in the private notes of Sheriff Thomas Wilkinson. Later found in his attic trunk after his death in 1861, even the house inventory raised questions. Several of Margaret's dresses, jewelry pieces, and personal effects were gone, along with 3 volumes from the library: Voltaire, Rousseau, and Milton's Paradise Lost. Caldwell claimed the books had been stolen by Samuel to mock the household. Then came the riverboat account. A captain testified that on the morning of April 11th, just after sunrise, a white woman and a black man boarded his vessel 10 miles downriver from the Caldwell estate. They paid for passage to New Orleans and disembarked quietly at the city docks. The woman wore a dark veil and spoke little. She didn't look afraid, the captain later said, just decided. After that, the trail went cold. Searches across New Orleans turned up nothing. Rumors suggested the pair had boarded a ship to Haiti, but passenger lists offered no trace. By June, gossip shifted. The Picayune published an anonymous column hinting that domestic cruelty might have driven Margaret to flee. Caldwell threatened suit, and the press quickly reverted to the abduction tale. By December of 1847, the plantation was sold. Caldwell left Louisiana for France, citing unfortunate memories. 2 years later, lightning supposedly struck the abandoned mansion, burning it to the ground. But locals whispered of something else, that the fire wasn't lightning at all, but cleansing. In 1958, long after the ruins had been claimed by swamp, workers renovating a townhouse in New Orleans unearthed a sealed tin box behind a plaster wall. Inside was a water-damaged journal marked Property of MC. The ink bled, the pages warped, but fragments could still be read. One entry from early 1846. He values his books more than my breath. Yet the new man, S., understands their language. He speaks of authors I thought buried to him. How did he learn such things, forbidden as they are? Another, months later, S. was sent to the fields. I protested. He struck me, said I had become too familiar with servants. If only he knew how familiar I wished to be. And the final legible entry, dated April 9th, 1847. When he leaves for New Orleans, we go. The riverboat waits at dawn. S. says there are people who can help us reach Philadelphia. I take only what cannot be replaced. My heart beats like wings. The discovery of that journal reignited interest in what had by then become little more than a fireside ghost story, a Southern myth told by tour guides and old-timers who swore the Caldwell plantation had been cursed since the night its mistress disappeared. But the tone of the journal, fragile as its ink stains were, suggested something else entirely, not abduction, but escape. In 1962, the Journal of Southern History published an article proposing that Margaret Caldwell's disappearance might have been a rare case of a voluntary interracial elopement, an idea that scandalized the genteel circles of Louisiana historians. A few called it nonsense. Others said it was blasphemy to the South's honored dead, yet the evidence kept surfacing. A researcher in Philadelphia unearthed a marriage certificate dated October 3, 1847, between an Ellen Davis and a Samuel Turner. The document described both parties as free persons of color, a term often used for light-skinned black individuals or mixed couples passing for free. In northern states, the officiating minister's private log, preserved in his church archives, included a cryptic note. The woman spoke with a southern accent despite claiming Charleston birth. Husband protective, kept watch by the door, fear visible. City directories from 1848 show a Samuel Turner operating a small carpentry business in Philadelphia's 7th Ward, a district known for its community of formerly enslaved families. The business remained listed until 1853, when records abruptly cease. Historians speculate they may have fled north to Canada following the Fugitive Slave Act, which again made escapees vulnerable to capture. After that, both vanish. Back in Louisiana, Thomas Caldwell was said to have died in Paris in 1857, his obituary in the New Orleans Mercury describing him as a man of honor who bore personal tragedy with dignity. He left no heirs. The plantation lands passed through creditors, eventually dissolving into the slow ruin of sugar fields gone wild. For decades, the story lingered only in whispers until 1966, when archaeologists surveying the old Caldwell site stumbled upon a charred cellar beneath the earth. In the ash and debris, they found 3 small relics: a woman's pearl hair comb, typical of the 1840s, a carpenter's folding ruler, initials ST faintly carved into its handle, and fragments of a letter addressed to "My dearest M." What could be read was chilling. "Cannot delay any longer. He suspects. He said today he would sooner see you dead than free." The date, April 7, 1847. The rest of the letter had disintegrated, but those few words redefined everything the official narrative had claimed. No parish death certificate for Margaret Caldwell was ever filed. No bones were ever found in the aftermath of the fire that supposedly destroyed the house. What had truly happened on that April night, whether flight or violence, dissolved into rumor and superstition. By the early 1900s, local stories had taken over where history faltered. People living along the river claimed that on quiet nights, they could see 2 figures walking hand in hand through the cypress fog. A tall black man in a white shirt and a pale woman in an old-fashioned dress, heads turned as if watching for pursuit. Some said they were lovers searching for freedom. Others whispered they were restless spirits trapped where their blood had spilled. By the 1960s, only one person was still alive who claimed a direct family connection to the Caldwell household: Martha Johnson, born enslaved on a neighboring plantation in 1861. In a recorded interview with Tulane University researchers, she recalled stories told by her grandmother, who had worked in the Caldwell kitchens. Miss Margaret and the carpenter had been planning it for months, her grandmother had said. She'd hide little notes in the book spines. The master found one. That's when things turned bad. When asked whether they truly escaped, Martha had paused, then whispered, "There were 2 stories, the one white folks told, about them running away, and the one we whispered. That the master caught her before she could go, and they both still under that house." Quiet as sin, no one could prove either version. By 1973, the land had been purchased by an industrial company hoping to build a refinery. Bulldozers cleared the cane fields that had grown wild for over a century. Workers soon began reporting odd events: tools vanishing, strange lights seen in the fog, the scent of smoke though no fire burned. A few men swore they heard a woman crying underground. After 3 months of unexplained mishaps, the project was abandoned. The company issued a statement citing environmental instability, but privately, employees later spoke of a feeling that the ground itself didn't want to be disturbed. The property lay untouched again for decades. Swamp reclaimed what was left. Trees grew where parlors once stood, and the story, like the land, sank back into silence. Then in 2008, a history professor from LSU, Dr. Elaine Morton, attempted to locate the original house foundation. During a period of low water, she found what looked like a rusted metal box protruding from the soil. Inside was a small leather-bound book, its pages warped and nearly unreadable. Among the few lines still visible was this passage: "If we are not discovered, this book will remain hidden. We shall begin new lives under new names in a place where we can exist without chains. But if we fail, if the worst comes, perhaps one day someone will find these words and know that what we shared was not a crime, nor a scandal, but the only freedom either of us ever knew." Dr. Morton suffered a stroke on site before she could record the box's location. When researchers returned, they found nothing: no box, no book, no trace. Her field notes were deemed unreliable, and once more, the story slipped back into the fog it came from. Today, in the Riverside Parish Courthouse, the case remains officially listed as unresolved, abduction, April 1847. A thin folder holds the yellowed newspaper clippings and the original missing person report, but no photographs, no artifacts. Just silence. Still, whispers persist. Some say Margaret and Samuel made it to Philadelphia, even to Canada. Others believe they died the night they tried to flee, victims of a husband's wrath and the world's cruelty, and a few, those who have stood at the overgrown site on a moonless night, swear the swamp itself remembers. They claim the air there holds a sound not quite like wind, not quite like water. A low murmur, two voices, one soft, one deep, whispering of escape. The decades after the Civil War brought new stories, but the Caldwell mystery remained one of those lingering tales people never spoke of too loudly, as though saying their names might wake something best left sleeping. Yet the silence didn't stop the rumors from deepening. In 1983, restoration work on an old church in Philadelphia's Northern Liberties neighborhood uncovered a hidden compartment beneath the pulpit. Inside were papers believed to belong to members of the Underground Railroad. Among them was a handwritten ledger listing those who had passed through the church between 1847 and 1851. An entry dated November 1847 read, E.D. and S.T. from Louisiana. Both provided shelter and passage funds to Canada. Woman recovering from injuries. Both fearful but resolute. That single line changed the conversation yet again. The possibility that Margaret and Samuel had indeed survived, wounded but alive, breathed new life into the story. Newspapers ran features. Academics argued. The public was split between those who saw romance and those who saw a cover-up. Yet no Canadian census, no Montreal church record, no gravestone bore names that matched. If they reached freedom, they hid it well. 8 years later, in 1991, a descendant of Thomas Caldwell's French relatives discovered a locked journal among family heirlooms in Paris. When translated, it contained entries between 1848 and 1857. Several spoke of M in tones alternating between rage and sorrow. One passage dated 1851 read, "Word has come that she was seen in Montreal. I will not pursue. Let the dead bury the dead. What was taken cannot be restored." And near the end, written weeks before his death. "I dream of Louisiana each night. The house burning, her voice below calling from the cellar. I wake at the hour we found the door open. Some sins do not die with distance." Was this the confession of a guilty man haunted by murder, or the lament of a husband tormented by betrayal? Historians couldn't agree. But for those who'd grown up near Riverside Parish, the journal only confirmed what their elders had always said, that the fire in 1849 hadn't been lightning. In 2002, a team of hydrologists studying the Mississippi's floodplain took soil samples near the old Plantation site. The cores revealed traces of accelerant, evidence of deliberate burning. In the deeper layers, they found faint human remains, fragmented, unidentifiable, but present. The findings were enough to prompt new testimony from families whose ancestors had worked on nearby estates. 3 separate oral histories surfaced, all telling similar accounts. In the days after Mrs. Caldwell vanished, enslaved men from neighboring plantations were ordered to dig through the night under watch of armed overseers. They said it was for drainage, one descendant recalled, but no one ever saw what came out of those holes. A single surviving letter from 1848 between the Riverside sheriff and the Louisiana governor added another shadow to the record. It referred to the regrettable Caldwell matter and warned that further inquiry would only invite impossible complications. Whatever lay buried beneath that house, no one dared disturb it again. By the 1980s, when early ground-penetrating radar was used on the site, experts detected anomalies below the soil consistent with a subcellar or sealed chamber. But permission for excavation was denied. The land had changed ownership too many times, and the latest owner refused to allow digging, citing respect for the dead. In 2013, advanced radar scanning again revealed something. A small structure about 30 yards from the main foundation, possibly an outbuilding or hidden storehouse never marked on plantation maps. Before anyone could explore further, the Mississippi flooded catastrophically, swallowing the area in mud. When waters receded, the structure was gone. The river had reclaimed it. Every few years, someone tries to reopen the case. Historians still argue over whether the story of Margaret Caldwell and Samuel Turner was a love affair, a murder, or both. The Louisiana Historical Society even formed a task force in 2005 to review every scrap of surviving evidence. Their 300-page report, released 2 years later, concluded that no single definitive narrative can be established. The majority opinion leaned toward murder, that both perished on the property in April 1847, likely at the hands of Thomas Caldwell or his men, and their remains were hidden before the fire. But not everyone agreed. A minority report pointed to the Philadelphia and Montreal documents, arguing that an escape, however improbable, remained possible. That interpretation inspired a 2010 documentary, The Runaways of Riverside Parish, which portrayed the couple as fugitives who built a secret life in Canada. The film romanticized their flight, but even its closing narration admitted, "The truth, like the river, changes course." Yet it was another discovery, far from Louisiana, that revived the legend once more. In 2018, a researcher in Montreal found a fragile death certificate from 1862 bearing the name Ellen Carter née Davis, age about 40, born in the southern United States. It listed her husband as Harold Carter and noted 2 surviving children. The attending physician had scribbled a marginal note. Before passing, patient requested that her journal and pearl comb be kept private at husband's insistence. Promised to respect her wish. Those items, the journal and comb, have never surfaced. If Ellen Carter was indeed Margaret Caldwell, then she and Samuel, now Harold, had escaped, rebuilt and perhaps even raised a family. If the certificate was a coincidence, then it's merely another ghost in a story already crowded with them. Either way, the plantation ground where it all began remains uneasy. Rangers who patrol the Riverside Wildlife Reserve, which now covers the area, report strange accounts from visitors, sudden drops in temperature, whispers that seem to drift through the trees, and occasionally 2 shapes glimpsed through the fog at dusk, a woman in pale fabric, a man beside her. Always near the place where the old house once stood, scientific teams have blamed acoustics, humidity, or simple expectation. But the locals who've lived near the swamp their whole lives know better. They say it's not ghosts exactly, not the vengeful kind. More like echoes, a story that refuses to stay buried. Each April, on the anniversary of her disappearance, someone leaves a single white lily and a wooden ruler carved with the initials ST near the overgrown clearing. No one knows who. Some believe it's a descendant. Others think it's the land remembering for us. What is known is that the story of the vanished bride and the runaway carpenter has outlived every attempt to erase it, outlived even the house that confined it. By the time the 21st century began, the story of Margaret Caldwell and Samuel Turner had taken on the weight of legend. Part history, part haunting, told on ghost tours and university panels alike. But beneath the folklore lay something far more uncomfortable, a record of a society built on power, silence, and the erasure of inconvenient truths. In Riverside Parish, the official archives still held the case under Unresolved Missing Persons, April 1847. Inside that file sat a handful of brittle newspaper clippings, a faded wanted notice, and the original reward posting with Caldwell's own signature in brown ink. No mention of the letter found in the cellar, no trace of the maid's testimony, no journal. The absence itself spoke volumes. Historians visiting the site often remarked that it was the quietest place they'd ever stood. Not peaceful quiet, but expectant, the kind that hums just before thunder breaks. The swamp surrounding the old foundation seemed alive in ways most land wasn't. Mosquitoes hovered in still air. Frogs fell silent when approached. On certain nights, the moon would hang low and red over the water, reflecting against the black cypress trunks like blood on glass. One park ranger, who'd worked the reserve for 15 years, said he'd never believed in spirits until he was assigned the Caldwell sector. "It's the air," he explained to a visiting journalist. "It goes heavy there. Your breath shortens, and every once in a while you catch the smell of wood smoke. But no fires burn." In 2007, a graduate student in anthropology named William Thibodeau grandson of one of the families long tied to the area, conducted interviews for his thesis on local oral histories. Among the recordings, one stands out. Granddaddy said they weren't looking for Mrs. Caldwell, the elderly interviewee recalled, his voice cracking through static. They were hunting Samuel. The master already knew where she was, said he'd rather see her dead than leave his name behind. When they found the cellar open, they closed it again. Permanent. That account echoed the sheriff's old confidential letter, confirming what many had long suspected, that the official search for a missing woman had been little more than theater. But proof, real, irrefutable proof, remained elusive. Over the years, various excavation efforts were proposed. Each time, bureaucratic red tape or unexpected flooding halted them, and yet, fragments kept surfacing like bones rising after rain. In 2009, a fisherman pulling catfish traps from a narrow bayou snagged something heavy in his net. When he hauled it aboard, he found a rusted iron hinge, curved and ornate, the kind used on cellar doors in 19th-century plantation houses. He took it to the parish museum, where curators compared it with architectural sketches from the Caldwell estate. The measurements matched perfectly. The hinge was dated to the 1840s. That hinge now sits in a glass case beside an artist's reproduction of Margaret's portrait, painted from the only surviving lithograph of her held in the French family archives. She stares out, her eyes a shade too dark, her expression unreadable, like she's listening for something only she can hear. Beside her, an empty frame bears a small brass plaque. Samuel Turner, no known image. For the historians who study the antebellum South, that blank space carries as much weight as the portrait itself. It's the absence that defines the story, the silence that has always surrounded those like Samuel, whose lives were documented only in purchase receipts and punishments, never in likeness or legacy. Dr. Elaine Morton, the LSU professor who'd nearly died after discovering the waterlogged journal, once wrote in an essay that the Caldwell case wasn't simply about love or rebellion, but about erasure. When power writes history, she said, truth survives only in margins, the notes hidden inside book bindings, the initials carved into a carpenter's tool. And yet, the more the story was studied, the more it refused to settle into any single version. Some scholars argued that the evidence of violence was too strong to ignore, the accelerant traces, the letter fragments, the burned cellar. Others pointed out the Philadelphia and Montreal findings, the marriage certificate, the death record of Ellen Carter. Both narratives seemed true in their own way, as if history itself had split, one version buried in Louisiana mud, the other carried north by rumor and faith. By 2021, a small coalition of local historians and descendants petitioned the state to erect a memorial marker at the site. They didn't want it to declare guilt or innocence, only remembrance. The wording, debated for months, was finally agreed upon. For those who sought freedom by whatever path was offered, their story continues. The marker was placed near the overgrown clearing that had once been the Caldwell House Foundation. It bears no names, no dates, only that single line. Visitors leave flowers, notes, and sometimes, inexplicably, be pieces of carved wood. Initials ST etched in rough lettering. Stranger still, the vegetation around the marker behaves differently than in the rest of the reserve. The grass grows sparse, yet the cypress saplings thrive, their roots curling over one another like clasped hands. Botanists say it's just the soil composition. But the locals have another explanation. The land remembers its own. At dusk, the place takes on a quality that can't be measured. The air dense, the silence not empty, but waiting. Some nights, the river mist drifts inland, swallowing the path, and visitors swear they hear voices just beyond sight. Not cries, not wails, but conversation. A woman's soft tone, a man's low answer. Then nothing. Park authorities have posted warnings against visiting the site after dark, but that hasn't stopped the curious. Amateur ghost hunters come with recorders and cameras, leaving with strange audio distortions, faint overlapping syllables, rhythmic tapping like hammer on wood. One clip, captured in 2019, contained a single audible word whispered between bursts of static: run. Whether that was interference, coincidence, or something older reaching through time, No one could say. But the recording circulated online, reigniting fascination with the case for a new generation. Within a year, the legend had its own podcasts, documentaries, even a feature-length adaptation pitched in Hollywood under the title The Bride of the Delta. Yet amid all the spectacle, something intimate persisted, a sense that this wasn't just a ghost story, but a wound. Every time the river floods, pieces of the past rise to the surface, glass fragments, nails, sometimes shards of pottery. Once a child found what appeared to be a charred ivory button half buried in the silt. When her mother asked where she'd found it, she pointed to the water's edge and said simply, "She dropped it." Time has a way of turning fact into echo. The Caldwell case, if that's even what it should be called, now lives somewhere between documented history and folklore, between what was proven and what people can't stop feeling in their bones. The official record calls it an abduction, the journals suggest an escape, the soil tells of fire, and the swamp remembers everything in its own language. It's said that when the air turns heavy in April, when the river swells and the frogs fall silent, you can feel the story stirring again. The sound of water trickling under the reeds sometimes takes on the rhythm of footsteps, and the wind catches through the moss like whispers passed from one century to the next. Those who've dared to spend a night near the marker tell of waking to faint music, not quite melody, not quite moan, drifting from the direction of the old foundation. One group of campers in 2020 described seeing a dim light flickering through the cypress, like a lantern moving, steady, as if someone were searching. When they followed it, they found no one, only the scent of wet wood and smoke hanging in the mist. No one knows whether what they sense is grief, love, or defiance. But the feeling is always the same, unfinished. The last tangible attempt to close the Caldwell file came in 2021, on the 174th anniversary of Margaret's disappearance. Parish officials, prompted by local historians, reopened the archive box for digital preservation. Inside, they found something unnoticed before, a folded scrap of parchment wedged behind a clipping. The handwriting, faint but legible, was in Thomas Caldwell's own hand. It read, April 12, 1847, "I told them to search the river. They will not find her there." No one could say whether the note referred to concealment, confession, or something more complex, but its discovery reignited debates across the state. News outlets ran headlines, "Louisiana's vanished bride, new evidence surfaces." But the truth, as always, remained diffuse, slipping through fingers like swamp water. For some, the story has become less about what happened and more about what it reveals. Margaret Caldwell, in her limited words, became a symbol of quiet rebellion, a woman trapped by class and marriage who dared to see the humanity of the man society called property. Samuel Turner became something rarer still, a man whose literacy, skill, and courage allowed him to cross both a river and an invisible line few ever survived crossing. Yet even their possible triumph, flight, reinvention, love, was shadowed by risk. To exist freely as an interracial couple in 1847 was to live like ghosts among the living. If they truly made it north, they would have been forced to bury their past so deeply that no trace could ever safely surface. The historian Dr. Morton once said, "Perhaps they did not vanish. Perhaps they chose to. And perhaps that is the cruelest mercy of all." In the Riverside Parish Historical Society's modest exhibit, the story is displayed with deliberate ambiguity. Two glass cases stand side by side. One holds a reproduction of the pearl comb, polished and unbroken. The other holds the rusted carpenter's ruler. Between them, a small plaque reads, "Bound by circumstance, divided by history, joined by what the world refused to understand." Visitors linger longest there, staring at the empty space between those artifacts, the silence that separates them. Children press their faces to the glass. Tourists whisper. Some leave flowers. Others leave coins or scraps of paper with messages written in pencil. One note, discovered after closing one evening, read simply, "We believe you got away." Outside, along the river path, locals still speak of seeing two figures walking at twilight, a woman in pale dress, a man in shadow beside her. They never speak, never turn their faces. But always they move toward the water. Some nights their reflections appear in the still surface of the river before fading when a breeze stirs. Skeptics dismiss such tales as tricks of light, but in a region where history bleeds into myth, not everything can be measured. The swamp does not forget. It merely waits. Every so often, after heavy rain, fragments rise to the surface, a hinge, a button, the curved piece of a teacup. Each discovery feels like the land exhaling, releasing a secret it's held too long, but never enough to end the story. Never enough to tell us who lived, who died, and who might have walked away unseen. One local poet captured it best in a verse published anonymously in a New Orleans paper decades ago. Two souls who cross the river wide, where freedom meets with fear. Their names erased, their paths concealed, their whispers linger near. Not ghost nor flesh but memory, too stubborn to depart. The truth lies buried not in earth, but in the human heart. That poem now appears carved into a wooden bench near the marker, an unofficial epitaph for a story that refuses to settle. And so, as the years turn and the past continues to rot gently beneath the cypress roots, the Caldwell mystery remains. Maybe Margaret and Samuel died together that night beneath the house, victims of vengeance. Maybe they lived under false names, raising children who never knew where they came from. Maybe their spirits walk the edge of the river even now, forever retracing the path they once hoped would carry them to freedom. Each theory feels both impossible and true. What endures is not certainty, but echo, the idea that love, guilt, and defiance can survive centuries of burial. That even in the darkest corners of the American South, truth can take root like wild cane and grow back after every attempt to burn it away. Those who visit the site on April nights say the wind feels different there, thicker, charged, like the air before a storm. They say if you stand very still, as the first drops of spring rain fall, you can hear them again, not crying, not calling for help, but whispering, urgently, softly, about what lies beyond the river. About the future they once imagined and might still be chasing, not ghosts, but something stronger, a story that refuses to end where others decided it should. A truth that keeps surfacing fragment by fragment into the light.